Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever tried to build a new healthy habit or maybe break a really stubborn bad one, only to find yourself right back at square one just a few weeks later? Honestly, if you're nodding your head right now, I want you to know you are absolutely not alone. Today, we're going to use this explainer to reveal the real evidence-based science behind exactly why our habits fail. And way more importantly, we're going to look at how we can finally make them stick for good.
So let's start with a number that literally blew my mind: 96%. Studies show that up to 96% of people who read self-help books fail to actually follow the advice inside them. I mean, think about that for a second. People are going out of their way to buy the book. They clearly have the motivation to improve, and yet almost everyone falls short. In fact, in some of these studies, only 2 to 4% of people actually complied with the program. And it gets even crazier when we look at New Year's resolutions. Big data from fitness tracking apps, we're talking analyzing over 800 million activities here, shows that a staggering 80% of people abandon their self-improvement goals by January 19th. January 19th, that is barely 3 weeks into the new year, and the vast majority of people have already completely thrown in the towel.
So, the huge question we really have to ask ourselves is why? Why do so many of us fail so consistently? Is it really our fault? Are we all just lacking discipline? Or is the system we've been relying on to change our behavior just fundamentally broken? You know, it's so incredibly easy to blame ourselves, but the science points in a completely different direction.
Let's get into section 1, the myths setting us up to fail. A huge reason we struggle is that we are basically playing the game with the wrong rulebook. Take myth number 1. Habits take 21 days to form. We've all heard this, right? Well, it's completely false. This whole magic number actually came from a plastic surgeon back in the 1960s who noticed it took his patients about 21 days to get used to their new faces. Pop culture somehow twisted that into a hard rule for daily habits. But a really rigorous study out of University College London found that a real habit actually takes an average of 66 days to form. And for some people, it took up to 254 days. So look, if your new routine still feels like a total chore after 3 weeks, please don't panic. That's perfectly normal.
Then there's this whole idea of the willpower battery. For nearly 2 decades, we were taught that willpower was literally like a fuel tank in your car. The idea was, if you used it up resisting a donut at work, your tank would be empty by the time you got home, making you powerless to resist junk food at night. But guess what? When massive teams of scientists recently retested this, the idea completely fell apart. The empty tank effect was virtually zero, meaning you weren't failing just because you ran out of willpower. This brilliantly illustrates the truth, which is that we really need to drop the constant guilt. Those people who look like they have iron willpower, they aren't actually grinding harder or out-muscling you. Research shows they've just set up their lives so they face fewer battles in the first place. They don't use more willpower, they just don't put themselves in situations where they need to use it. So if white-knuckling it with raw willpower doesn't work, what actually does? I mean, if we can't rely on a magical 21-day timeline, and we can't rely on a bottomless well of self-control, what tools should we actually be using to build lasting change?
Which brings us to section 2, bridging the gap from thinking to doing.
How do we actually move from having really good intentions to, actually taking action? Well, researchers have found that sincerely wanting to change, like genuinely wanting to lose weight or write that book, only accounts for about 25% of your actual success. That's it. Just wanting it badly simply isn't enough to make it happen. You can have literally all the motivation in the world, but without a mechanism to execute it, you end up being someone who always wants to act, but never quite starts.
We usually try to fix this by visualizing our success. Picture the finish line, right? But psychologists discovered something fascinating. Just daydreaming about the finish line actually lowers your motivation and energy. Why? Because your brain gets tricked into feeling like you've already won. Your blood pressure literally drops. Instead, you need to use something called mental contrasting. You imagine your goals, sure, but then you immediately visualize the biggest internal obstacle standing in your way. This signals to your brain that, hey, real effort is actually required to overcome this hurdle.
Once you've pinpointed that obstacle, you need a specific tool to beat it: the if-then plan. This just means giving your brain a super simple automatic rule to follow. For example, if I feel stressed after work, then I will go for a 10-minute walk. By linking a specific trigger directly to an action, the walk just happens automatically when you feel stressed without you having to summon any extra willpower. And you can actually combine these two powerful concepts into a highly practical tool called the WOOP method.
It stands for wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. It's incredibly simple. First, name your wish. Second, visualize the best outcome. Third, identify your main internal obstacle, like maybe it's procrastination or just being tired. And fourth, make your if-then plan to overcome it. Studies show that using this exact framework roughly doubles your chances of actually following through on your goals. Doubles them.
All right, moving on to Section 3, designing your surroundings.
Here's the secret. Our external environment dictates our behavior much, much more than our inner drive ever does. You want to rely on systems, not willpower. Essentially, this means acting as the architect of your own life. You deliberately arrange your physical and your digital space so that doing the right thing takes zero effort, and doing the wrong thing is just incredibly annoying. Let's look at some concrete, everyday examples of how you can alter your environment. Say you want to focus better. Put your smartphone in a totally different room while you work. The physical friction of actually having to stand up and walk down the hall breaks the mindless habit of grabbing your phone. If you want to eat better, leave healthy snacks directly on the kitchen counter right in plain sight, and bury the junk food in the very back of a low cabinet. Use website blockers on your laptop during work hours. You are basically setting up protective defaults for yourself, so you don't even have to make a choice in the heat of the moment.
So, designing your environment is incredibly powerful. But wait a second. Even with the WOOP method, even with if-then plans and a perfectly designed room, why do even these awesome tools sometimes fail us? Why might you try all of this and still struggle to change a stubborn habit?
That brings us to our final piece of the puzzle. Section 4, your stage of change. To make all this really work, you have to understand exactly where you are in your own personal journey. Because change is absolutely not a simple on and off switch. It is not an overnight event. It's a lengthy cycle of distinct stages. We move from not even realizing we have a problem, to thinking about it, to preparing for it, and finally, to actually taking action. And because of these different stages, you need totally different tools depending on where you're currently at. If you are in the contemplation stage, meaning, you're just thinking about maybe changing a habit in the next 6 months, your best tool is honestly just weighing the pros and cons. If you're in preparation, getting ready to act in the next 30 days, that's when you bring in the if-then plans and the WOOP method. And if you are in the action stage, actively making the change day to day, well, that is when you heavily rely on your environment design. And right here, this is exactly why we fail so often. Using an action-oriented tool, like completely rearranging your kitchen to hide junk food when you are only in the contemplation stage and just casually thinking about eating healthier, that will almost certainly backfire. You haven't built up the mental readiness yet. The absolute biggest reason we fail in self-directed change is mismatching our behavioral strategy to our current stage of readiness.
So let's wrap all of this up into a new science-backed toolkit that replaces that awful guilt with actual workable strategy. First, remember, you aren't weak. The whole finite willpower battery is a total myth. Second, give yourself some grace. Expect a new habit to take an average of 66 days, not 21. Third, bridge the gap between thinking and doing using the WOOP method and specific if-then rules. Fourth, make those good habits automatic by designing your environment to reduce friction. And lastly, always make sure you are matching your tool to your specific stage of change.
By finally letting go of the old myths and using these proven frameworks, you can absolutely build systems that work for you, rather than feeling like you're constantly fighting against yourself. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. What small if-then plan will you make today to redesign your environment? Pick just one tiny thing, test it out, and see just how much easier change can actually be.